At our Future Female Forward event. Your presence really means a lot to us. And of course, we're talking at a time when this is an issue that needs to get urgent attention. Look at what's happening over the world. We've had a COVID pandemic. We've had a war between Ukraine and Russia. We've had a food and energy crisis. And all of this is worsening the gender gap, worsening and impacting the participation of women in workforce, policy making, and boardrooms as well. Everyone has said that we need to have more women in the workforce if our countries need to progress, if our GDP needs to grow, and if our growth targets need to be met. We really want to speak to you about the global example. And I'd like to begin with the US Ambassador, Ambassador Beth Jones. Ambassador Jones, let me begin by asking you, is it easier to be a woman diplomat now than it was when you started your career? You've served in Pakistan, you've served in India. How is it to be a diplomat in the room now compared to 30 years ago?
It is different. My first posting was in Afghanistan, as a matter of fact. And the first thing I learned there, I was very nervous about being a young woman there, a woman, but I was seen as a diplomat, not male or female. So that instantly gave me courage, and I progressed in my career to serve in the Middle East. And I found in the Middle East and in South Asia that, that increasingly women were accepted.
You can bring your mic closer.
Women were accepted, and particularly here in India, as we've seen from the fabulous people we've seen this afternoon, that there is a tremendous amount of work underway to bring women into the workforce and make sure that 50% of the population can contribute to the economic prosperity of any country, including here in India.
Right. Thank you for those opening remarks, Ambassador Jones. And we will come back to you for some personal anecdotes as well. I'd like to bring in the Bangladesh Ambassador, Ambassador Rahman. Bangladesh has really stood out when it comes to policies, when it comes to budgets. 5% of the GDP was allocated towards women's schemes, towards 44 ministries in Bangladesh, in the Bangladesh government. You've got a big participation of women in the garments industry. Tell us about some of those initiatives that have really worked for Bangladesh when it has come to increasing the participation of women in the workforce.
First of all, let me thank CNBC and TV18 for inviting us to this wonderful gathering. Well, I think I can start in that way, that over the past decade, Bangladesh has, as you said, achieved some remarkable success in the area of women empowerment and gender equality. And I think we started with the adoption of right kind of legal framework. So it was the National Women Development Policy, which was followed by a very pragmatic national action plan for the implementation of the policy. And I think that was the beginning. And the government also took a number of very pragmatic decisions for that. For example, it emphasized on the girls' education. And for that, it made the girls' education free up to 12th grade and providing free textbook for all, including girls and boys, and then providing stipend for the girl students. So I think all these have borne fruit in achieving gender parity and parity in particularly in the education sector. Basically, if I may say that we have broken many glass ceilings by inducting our women into higher judiciary, highest level of administrative positions, diplomatic assignments. I have 8 female colleagues who are ambassadors in important countries, including the UK, and also as permanent representative in the United States, UN in New York. She was just left this position. So in all, I would say that our participation, even in the women, even the armed forces and police, our ladies are working in the UN peacekeeping operations across the world. So I mean, in all, it's a good show, I would say, that what we are doing, and the government is committed to do further. so that it is, I mean, I would say that it's not that everything is going smooth, everything is fine, everything with a challenge, but the government is committed to push it further and to achieve more and more in terms of women empowerment. And as you said, we stood first in the gender gap index in South Asia. Thank you.
Right, and you've had two leaders, Khalida Zia and Sheikh Hasina, who served 2 terms. And of course, that must be a huge inspiration for women politicians, diplomats, and entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs across Bangladesh. Ambassador Farrell, if I can get you in, just to ask you about the Australia example. We've seen Australia pushing with the Workplace Gender Equality Amendment Bill. Give us a sense of why these legislative steps are necessary. And the reason why I ask is because of a strong remark by the UN Secretary General recently, ladies and gentlemen, where the UN Secretary General went on to say that we are 300 years away from gender equality, and the whole talk of gender equality is actually vanishing from the table as well. So why do you think some legislative steps are necessary, giving us the Australian example?
Well, in the Australian example, that is about trying to introduce transparency, because if there's transparency, it is much harder for companies, for organisations to deny women a role. Admiral Kumar today talked about very openly about the statistics that he has and the fact that they're not at where he'd like to be, 50% or more. You know, in Australia we have a 13% wages gap between men in the workforce and women. My new government elected last May, is committed to reducing that further, but you're only going to do that if people in companies know what salaries are and can see the differences where people are doing the same job and not. So we're using legislation, I think, for all the right reasons, which is to drive change. And I have to say that I think that all of us in positions of authority need to be working in this area. And can I give you 2 examples, Parikshit, is that when I was Chief Minister of Australia's largest state, we reviewed our criminal code to remove as a criminal defence the claim of provocation. And this was particularly important for spousal or partner murder. Equally, when I was elected in 2011, not in the 19th century, but in 2011, I had a delegation of my male colleagues come and tell me that it was inappropriate to appoint a woman to the role of transport spokesman. Well, frankly, I went ahead anyway. She did a fantastic job, and she ultimately ended up as Chief Minister. So there's nothing you can't do. I appointed a female speaker, the first one in 160 years, not because she was a woman, but because she was the right person for the job. Equally in not just transport, but agriculture and other portfolios. So, you know, if you're doing these things in public, and I credit your network for this exercise, because unless women can see the roles in which they can make a contribution, why would they put their hand up to join the military forces? Why would they put their hands up even to become a lawyer? So it's terrific. It's terrific that this is happening. But legislation sometimes gives that transparency, gives that shove to make sure something happens.
Right. Thank you so much for those remarks, Ambassador Farrell. Ambassador Astuto, to get you in at this point, according to the European Institute for Gender Equality, Europe has been stagnating when it comes to bridging the gender gap, when it comes to women's greater role of women in the workforce, in policy making as well. Where do you think the problem lies? We've seen Scandinavian countries doing very well when it comes to bridging the gender gap. But do you feel the war, the pandemic, the slowdown that we're seeing has all been a setback for the drive for greater women's equality in Europe as well?
Thank you, and let me also echo the words of my colleagues in congratulating the network for this fantastic event, a very fitting celebration in the wake of the 8th of March of International Women's Day. As to this report, well, certainly COVID has not helped. I think we have all noted there has been a stagnation when it comes to the necessary progress in towards gender equality. The illegal, unjustified Russian aggression is also proving devastating, particularly toward the most vulnerable groups. And you've seen the women and the elderly particularly exposed to acts of aggression. As to Europe, I think it's fair to say there is still a lot to do. If you look at reports such as the World Economic Forum Global